Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here today. Good to see all of you present this morning. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. It's a new life for me. Those are the opening words of the song Feeling Good, sung by Nina Simone. They're words that are perhaps appropriate on this new dawn, this new day, this 1st of January 2023. 2022 was a year of hardship, struggle, and suffering for many people. A difficult year with problems caused by wars, natural disasters, political instability. It was the year of 3 prime ministers and 2 monarchs, and economic turmoil. And these things have had an impact upon our own personal lives in one way or another. Many of you have also faced the personal struggle, perhaps of disappointments, of health challenges, and the loss of loved ones. But these are the things that happen in life. Life is full of these changes and challenges, and sometimes it is difficult to cope. But we must always look forward with hope and expectation. And life was no different in the ancient world. As today, people had their own hopes and expectations, their own challenges and disappointments. And in the passage we've read this morning, we're introduced to one character, Simeon, who was looking forward with eager expectation and anticipation. We're told in the passage that he was looking for the consolation of Israel. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he should not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. Perhaps as each new year began, or each new month or week or day, Simeon would wake up and wonder, well, is this the time? Is this the day when that promise would be fulfilled? In Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, the Apostle Paul writes, "But when the time had fully come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law." What Simeon was waiting for happened at the moment of God's choosing, when the time had fully come. At that precise time, Jesus, God's Son, was born of a woman, born into a Jewish family under the law. And as such, his family understood their responsibility of keeping that law. In the passage we've read this morning, we see Mary and Joseph obeying the laws relating to the birth of a child. There were 3 requirements under the law that had to be fulfilled when a child was born. The first was circumcision, if the child were male. Luke chapter 2, verse 21 here says, "At the end of 8 days, when he was circumcised, he was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb." The commandment for circumcision went back to God's covenant with Abraham. In Genesis chapter 17, verses 10 to 12, God said to Abraham, "Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He that is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised." And that law was repeated to Moses in Leviticus chapter 12 and verse 3, where God commands, "And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised." Circumcision was the sign of the covenant that God had made between himself and those who would become the descendants of Abraham. And circumcision introduced the baby into the community of God's covenant people, and brought with it acceptance of the obligations and the blessings of that covenant. So Mary and Joseph fulfilled the requirement of the law by having Jesus circumcised when he was 8 days old. And at the same time, we're told that he was given the name Jesus, the name that had been announced by the angel before his birth occurred, when Mary had been told, "You shall call his name Jesus." And that name indicated his mission to save people from their sins. The second requirement of the law that Mary and Joseph fulfilled concerned purification. Here in Luke chapter 2, verse 22, we read, "And when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses, The law concerning purification following the birth of a child is recorded in Leviticus chapter 12, verses 1 to 5. When a male child was born, the mother would be in a state of ceremonial impurity for 40 days, which meant she couldn't go to the temple, she couldn't participate in worship activities. But after that period of uncleanness, the mother then had to offer a sacrifice, the details of which are recorded there in Leviticus chapter 12, verses 6 to 8. She had to offer a lamb, a year old, for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. So the reason Mary and Joseph had gone to the temple in Jerusalem was for them to make this offering for Mary's purification, 40 days after the birth of Jesus. And Luke chapter 2, verse 24 says that they went to offer a sacrifice according to what was said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Apparently, Mary and Joseph could not afford to offer a lamb in sacrifice, and so they offered the 2 doves or the 2 pigeons instead. And then the third requirement of the law that had to be fulfilled was the redemption of the firstborn. The law said that every firstborn male belonged to the Lord, was to be dedicated to the Lord. Exodus chapter 13, verse 2, God says, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast, is mine." The firstborn animals were to be offered to God in a sacrifice, but the firstborn male children were to be redeemed by the payment of a price. And Numbers chapter 18, verse 16 tells us this, "And their redemption price, at a month old you shall redeem them, you shall fix at 5 shekels in silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary." As Jesus was Mary's firstborn son, he had to be redeemed by the payment of this price of 5 shekels of silver. And Luke tells us this here in chapter 2, verses 22 and 23, that they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. And so there were 2 reasons why Mary and Joseph took Jesus to the temple. First, so that they could make the offering for Mary's purification following her 40 days of ceremonial uncleanness. And second, in order to pay the redemption price of 5 shekels of silver for the firstborn male. Adding to this, the circumcision of Jesus that took place when he was 8 days old, we can see that Jesus was brought up in a family that took the law of the Lord seriously. They understood their responsibilities and what it was that the law required of them. And Luke chapter 2, verse 39 sums up their visit to Jerusalem when Luke says, "And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth." So they had gone there and they had done all of these things according to the law. It was whilst Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus were in the temple in Jerusalem, fulfilling these requirements of the law, that they met Simeon. And Luke tells us about him here in verse 25. "Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, looking for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him." He's described here as a righteous man, a man of upright character who behaved well towards other people. He's also described as devout, meaning that he took his religious duties seriously. And we're told that he was looking for the consolation of Israel. There was at that time a growing expectation amongst the Jews that the Messiah, the one who had been predicted in the prophets, would soon come to relieve them of their suffering and their oppression at the hands of the Romans. The Messiah would bring them comfort and consolation to Israel. And so Simeon was waiting with eager expectation for this to happen. A promise had been made to Simeon through a revelation of the Holy Spirit that he would live to see the Christ, the consolation of Israel. Verse 26 says, and it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he should not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. Now, we do not know when this revelation was given or just how long Simeon had been waiting for the fulfillment of that promise. Had it been years or had it been months? But one day, inspired by the Holy Spirit, Simeon went into the temple at the exact time when Joseph and Mary had brought the child Jesus there to fulfill the custom of the law. God had worked things out. God had brought them together there in the temple at that precise moment. And then when Simeon saw the child, Luke says he took him in his arms and blessed God. Simeon praised God and thanked him, for he knew now that this was the child, this was the consolation of Israel, the Lord's Christ. And verses 29 to 32 here record Simeon's words on this occasion. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to the to thy people Israel. Having seen the one that had been promised, then Simeon was now ready to depart this world in peace. Simeon's task of waiting and watching is finished, and now he's ready to go home, ready to depart in peace. He says, mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared in the presence of all peoples. He recognizes that this little baby that he holds in his arms, so helplessly there, is the one who will bring salvation to all people. That this is the salvation that the Lord has prepared from before time. And Simeon goes on to say that this child is a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to thy people Israel. Simeon can see that the salvation provided by this child will extend to all peoples, to Gentiles and to Jews, that this is not just for Israel, but it's a salvation that will be made available to everyone, regardless of their origin. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, Paul writes, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. The gospel of salvation that Paul preached, and of which he was not ashamed, was predicted beforehand when Simeon held in his arms the baby who would be the subject of that gospel message. Jesus came into this world as light, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and a light for glory to Israel. Jesus brought light into a world that is darkened by sin and by ignorance. He came as a light to reveal truth and glory to mankind, a light to show us the way back to God. When Simeon had spoken these words about Jesus there in the presence of Joseph and Mary, Luke says, and his father and his mother marveled at what was said about him. Joseph and Mary were astonished by Simeon's words concerning Jesus. They already knew, of course, that Jesus was someone special. They knew the miraculous nature of his conception. They knew that the angel had told him that he was the Son of God. But now even more is added to their understanding of what he would do and who he was. And Simeon then blessed Mary and Joseph and had a special word for Mary herself. Behold, this child is set for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is spoken against, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also, that thoughts out of many hearts may be revealed. Perhaps these words were not as welcome as the first words that Simeon had uttered, for here he predicts the effects that this child would have upon the people and what ultimately would happen to him. Simeon says that this child is set for the fall and the rising of many in Israel. People will respond to Jesus in two ways. He will cause some to fall, and he will cause others to rise up. It all depends on how people respond to him. Jesus' ministry, his work, caused a division amongst people. Some accepted him as the Christ, whilst others rejected him and wanted nothing to do with him. And this is what Simeon told Mary there in the temple, that this baby would be set for the fall and the rising of many. He also told Mary that the baby would be for a sign spoken against. People would speak against him, even though he demonstrated the power of God through the good works that he had done, even though he had been sent into this world from God. People would still reject him, and they would speak against him. And as for Mary herself, Simeon warned that her soul would be pierced through with a sword, that Mary would suffer when she saw what her son had to go through there upon the cross, that his sufferings would break her heart. And then finally, Simeon says that thoughts out of many hearts may be revealed. Jesus will reveal the thoughts and the motives of every heart. He knows what is in the hearts of men, and nothing will be hidden from him. When Mary and Joseph took the baby Jesus into the temple to fulfill the requirements of the law, they had an unexpected meeting with Simeon, a man who had been promised a sight of the Christ, the consolation of Israel, before his own death. Inspired by the Holy Spirit, Simeon told Mary and Joseph some astonishing things about the baby that he held there in his arms, things that startled them and things that would cause them great sorrow. Simeon's words are perhaps a summary of the gospel, a prediction of the events that were to come. The baby in his arms was the Christ, the one sent by God into this world to provide salvation for all people, the one who had come to fulfill the plan of God. But when this child grew up and started to fulfill his ministry, he would cause a division between people. There would be some who would reject him, and there would be some who would accept him. Some would speak against him, and in the end, they would nail him to a cross. And Mary's own soul would be pierced through to see such suffering. Simeon's words were fulfilled, and they continue to be fulfilled to this day, as people remain divided over Jesus, divided between acceptance of him or rejection of him, between rising and falling, between salvation and condemnation. When Simeon held that baby that God had promised that he would see, he prayed, "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace." Having seen the Christ, having come to that moment, Simeon felt a great sense of fulfillment, satisfaction. This is what it had been leading to. And so what more could he desire? "Lord, lettest thou thy servant depart in peace." We do not know what the year ahead may hold for us, what surprises, what challenges, what joys and sorrows. But we do know that we can enter this new year with the peace of Christ to comfort and to strengthen us. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. It's a new life for me, because the Lord's Christ, the consolation of Israel, the light has come. May God bless you, bring you peace in 2023. Amen.